you are. Welcome to the GYBN UNESCO session on intergenerational insights, exploring indicators for social ecological justice. So this is a two-day session for tonight and for tomorrow as well. Can we get the next slide, please? For the participants today, please be reminded that we have interpretations for this session. So we have French and Spanish interpretations. So if you would like to go on that room, so please look into the bottom part of your Zoom platform. You can see interpretations there. So click that language there that you wanted to go to. So you have your FR and your ES for Espanol and for French. So you could go to that room if you would want to have an interpretation for today's session. And also, please be reminded to mute your microphone if you are not speaking. Also, this session is being recorded. And if you are able to talk later on our discussion, please speak slowly for our interpreters able to capture what you are saying on the interpretation room. Also, please be reminded to rename yourself so we could easily address you later on. Put your name and then your country and the language that you wanted to use for the interpretations for the entire session for today. So for example, we have SEPA/Philippines/EN for English interpretation. So you could also do that at the bottom of your platform. Look into your name and then rename options for that as well. Thank you. Okay, again, this webinar is supported and we are grateful to UNESCO partnering with the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and we would want to discuss more of learning more on the indicators for social-ecological justice later on and see how youth can participate on that. Okay, before we kind of like move towards the discussion on today's session, we are happy to share with you about the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. If this is the first time that you would be attending, organized by GYBN. So the Global Youth Biodiversity Network was founded in 2010 and is a global coalition of young people and youth organizations acting together to lead, support, and accelerate a just and equitable transition to a society that lives in harmony with nature. So since 2012, GYBN or GYBN is officially recognized as the International Coordination Platform for Youth Participation in the Convention on Biological Diversity. You can learn more of GYBN looking into our website, so gybn.org. And you could also follow our social media platforms on Twitter and on Instagram. We also have our Facebook page, which is also flashed in the slide. So on Instagram, you can look at us at GYBN_CBD. And on Facebook, you just look at the GYBN for that matter. And our community is a growing community who are working together for biodiversity conservation across the globe. So currently we have 53 national chapters and we have 4 regional chapters. And you can see on the map, we are all over the place and we are happy to welcome you in our community as well. When you look into our website, you can see how you can be part of the community working together for biodiversity conservation and leading the participation of youth into meaningful discussions and conservation work across different platforms in different regions as well. So you can just look into GYBN.org if you wanted to learn more on how to be part of this growing community of young conservationists and biodiversity champions. And to better explain the objectives of the session for today and for tomorrow, I give the slides to Sepa. Sepa.
Thank you so much, Mark. Hello, everyone. My name is Josefa Tauli. I'm Policy Co-Coordinator for the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. I'm happy to introduce a bit more about the 2-day workshop that we are organizing today and tomorrow. So we're very excited actually to have this conversation with you on youth-related indicators when it comes to biodiversity and the environment. So on this first day, we are going to this is a space that is for young people, for you, the participants, so that we can understand better what our perspectives and views are on what indicators are meaningful for us when it comes to youth engagement. So it will be an interactive discussion that will be facilitated. And we hope that everyone can participate actively in this space so that we can make the most of the outcomes today. So tomorrow, our objective is to then expand this discussion to issues that are important for young people. And we are excited to welcome an intergenerational panel of experts who will speak to different aspects of issues that young people have mentioned are important to them. Issues like intergenerational equity, meaningful youth participation, equity, and national engagement and contributions of young people. So we hope you can join us for both days. And yeah, we're very happy to welcome you today. So for today, the program will be as follows. We are opening the webinar now. We'll shortly have a small icebreaker to just get to know who's in the room and see where everyone is from and understand your expectations for today. And most of today will be spent in a facilitated discussion on youth, biodiversity, and indicators. After that, we will share a bit more about where the outputs of this discussion will go and share a bit about some relevant ongoing processes when it comes to biodiversity indicators, where we can use the views that we gathered today. Okay. Then we will have an overview of tomorrow's session, and then hopefully you can stay so that you can give us some feedback also on today's session. Okay, so with that, I will pass this to passing this to Sudha, who will facilitate for us some initial questions. So we invite everyone to go to menti.com or the Menti app on your phone, and then insert this code, okay? And we'll be using Menti throughout the session, so we hope you can manage to log in and stay on. Sudha?
Yeah, thanks, Safa. So welcome everyone to the first session. And as Safa mentioned, I'll just put a link also on the chat where it's easier to access and share my screen. Right. So we just have a few questions to just get to know who's in the room, where are you joining us from, and all those kind of basic, just to get to know each other before the session starts, right? So I've put the link on the chat, or you can also go to www.menti.com and type this code 45361946 or scan the QR code. So I'll just wait for a couple of minutes I can see that 20 of you have already joined. That's great. So I'll just wait for a few more seconds so that more of you can join, and then we can start. I like all the thumbs up that's coming in. It's a continuous stream, yeah. 28 people, that's great. 29. So maybe I'll go to the next slide and tell us which country you're joining us from, and it'll appear as a word cloud. And I hope all of you can see like the Spanish and French translation of the question on your screens as well. So we have participants from India, Brazil, Singapore, Lebanon, Bolivia, Philippines, Morocco, Dominica, Vietnam, Machu Picchu, oh, that's nice. Barbados, okay, I can see quite a lot. Guyana, Paraguay, Greece, Botswana, Nigeria, Peru, Nepal, Chile. Okay, so it's wonderful to see so many of you joining from different countries, and this is coming up as a word cloud. Mexico, Portugal, El Salvador, Australia. Oh, it must be quite late there, and you still joined us. That's great. Madagascar, Norway, Myanmar, Burgundy. That's nice. Keep your answers coming. I'll just hold on to the slide a bit more, few more seconds. And Philippines, India, and Guyana have come up quite prominently here. So we have quite a lot of participants from these places. Peru has come in, France has come in, Bangladesh is there. That's nice. Afghanistan, wow, okay. Keep them coming. I'll go to the next. South Africa has joined in, right? So I'll now, I see that 56 have answered. So I'll just go to the next slide without taking too much time. How are you feeling today? Right. So it's a Wednesday evening here in India where I'm joining you from. Let's see what all of you are in the mood for. Okay, I see that sleeping and a smiling face have come in. Right. Someone's having a nice drink and relaxing. I see someone has put in a giraffe, open tongue. Okay, someone's feeling cheeky. And as there's shark, which is an angry looking shark, and some of you are feeling that emotion. Right? And owl, I think there's only two of you. And I think that's a surprised look that the two of you are having. Hopefully by the end of the session, all of you will be the first emoji because you'll learn quite a bit and it's been interesting session as it. Okay. So the majority here that we see is a chilled out dog mood, and that's great to see. And that's a good, emotion before we dive into all the serious topics and learn from the session. We'll go to the next slide. So, 1 second. Yeah, which age group do you belong to? So this is just to get an idea, sense of your age group, like the people, participants on today's call. Majority of you are from between 15 and 30 years. That's great to know. And some of you are also the second category, 31 to 50. So this is just to get a sense of, like who are on the call with us and other people, like just to know the crowd a bit better. Right. So majority is in the 15 to 30 age group. And I think the next one is quite an interesting one. Where what are you looking forward to in today's session? So this is what Sefa mentioned. Like, what are your expectations? What are you looking forward to learning from today's session after the overview that Sefa has given, all of you? Right. I'm not familiar with French or Spanish, so forgive me. Maybe the Spanish interpreters can pick out some of these and explain them. Informative and fun. Learn about collaboration, inspiration. Okay. How youth can advocate for biodiversity conservation, right? Share to be more informed about, I guess, indicators, youth engagement in NBSAP, indicators in NBSAPs. Those are all great answers coming in. Target setting and direction. How youth can become meaningfully involved in conservation and biodiversity, right? To learn about the work you do and how it relates to the topic. I'm afraid Gibbon's work might not be covered completely in this workshop. It's more on indicators, on youth indicators and the different policies. So we might have some other workshop that might target specifically the Gibbon's work. Finding new friends and learn about youth rights. That is good. You will make a lot of friends from today's workshop also, with a lot of interactive sessions. Connect with people from all around the world. Youth engagement, collaboration, opportunity for more collaborations between Gibbon and MAB Youth Network, especially around policy implementation. Yeah, so I think this is a great platform for you, especially in breakout rooms, to discuss your ideas and your strategies so that you can make friends, and the engagement goes beyond just the 2-day workshop. Learn about biodiversity indicators. Exactly, you learn quite a lot about that topic. Information indicators and biodiversity youth engagement. Yeah, so I can see quite a lot of good responses coming in, and we have all this saved as a feedback also to make sure going forward for tomorrow's session we can incorporate some of these as well. I don't want to take too much time, Sefa, so maybe I can stop here and let the answers keep coming in, and I'll hand it over to you or Mark. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sudha, for leading us in our nice um, icebreaker to get to know who's in the room. So for the next part, this is the main part actually. So we're having a facilitated discussion, as we said, on youth, biodiversity, and indicators. So for the first part, I'm passing this on to Heitor Deliasta from Brazil, who is also Gibbon's policy co-coordinator, to take us through the first part. Please stay on Menti, actually, because the first part is also a Menti question. It's on the same link. Go ahead, Heater. Sorry.
Hello,
So this
everyone.
while I share.
Thank you, Sefa. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us today. As Sefa mentioned, my name is Heitor de Lasta. I'm from Brazil and policy coordinator for GYBN. So today we will start talking about youth biodiversity and indicators. And for the first part, I'd like you to kindly go to Menti again and answer a question that is in your everyday lives, what are the ways you measure your well-being? Is still the same mind that you used previously? So we can go to the same one or answer one more question about what are the ways you are measuring your well-being. So we are already receiving about the mood, about relaxed levels of anxiety, daily activity, how stressed I am, how much energy I have, productivity, mental and physical health, that's very important, emotional well-being, exercising, okay, monetary satisfaction, how well and how much I have been sleeping. Very good, very good. Let's see what more do we have. Quality of sleeping again, eating well, physical and emotional capacities again, productivity, energy and productivity. Good, good, good. How many times I cry over the day? That's good enough. Stress, energy activities, enjoying fresh air and having balanced diet food. How much I'm happy, sleeping pattern, health, finance, productivity. Okay, do you have more to come? Okay, so mood, access to green areas and daily meals. Great, great, great. Well, thank you very much all for sharing this with us. By this question, I think there are two opportunities for us to start this discussion. So if you can pass to the next slide, please, Sefa. The first one is understanding exactly that all of us and all of you, we are already using indicators in our day-to-day. So indicators sometimes can see as something very far away from our reality, or we are used to see indicators in research, in policy agendas. But if we go for a deep look about how we are measuring our well-being and how we are seeing if we have a good day or if we are not having a good day, this is all talking about indicators. So we are all using indicators in our day-to-day. And it's important here today for us to differentiate what is a measurement, that is a standard unit used to express size, amount, or degree. What is a metric? That is a system of standard of measurement. So you can see that some of us have mentioned about being healthy. And you can use, I don't know, your fever to say if you are on a healthy situation or if you are unhealthy for some reason. So you can say that I am above, or I am around 36, 37, 38 degrees Celsius. But a lot of us also mention sleeping as a good proxy for our well-being. So we can also consider it that, well, I slept 6, 7, 8, more than 8 hours in my day. And this too can be considered ways for us to relate it with measure and metric. But an indicator is when we use a measure or a metric based on verifiable data that conveys information about more than itself, which means that if we are considering our fever metric, we can try to identify in our workshop today how many of us are in a good healthy, so how many of us are above 36 degrees Celsius, or we can ask about if everybody here have a good night of sleeping. So have everybody slept at least 8 hours? So this is ways that we can see that indicators are being used in our day-to-day, and what indicators are more precisely and how can be used. Please, Sefa, go to the next one. So indicators means that they are purpose dependent, so they can be used to answer specific questions. They help identifying gaps in data and resources. So of course that they can be used for implementation of frameworks. And here we will talk a little bit more later about our global biodiversity framework and how indicators are being used to measure it. At the same time, if you have good or bad indicators, it can help us to be used to track targets, to raise more awareness, to communicate, or to early warnings about something that might or might not be going on the way that we are expecting it to go.
Peter,
And
sorry to interrupt. The interpreters are asking you to slow down a little bit.
oh,
Thank you.
sorry. Okay, thank you very much. And of course, that indicators also can provide interface between policy and biodiversity related science aspects that can simplify our complex subjects. So most of us here, or some of us here, might see different agendas related with climate, with biodiversity, and we are used to see climate and green gas house emissions as one of the main indicators for it. And when we go for biodiversity, we have a much more complex relationship between what should we measure, what should we recognize for measuring things. So this go for both sides related with people, but also related with nature. So if you go to the next slide, please, Sefa. The second thing on that we can reflect on our mind questions is that indicators can be used to measure a diversity of aspects and values. So how can we define and measure well-being? In your Menti answers, we saw different aspects that was related with health, was related with mental, emotional aspects, was related with activities on our day-to-day, was mentioned about relationships that we have during our day with green areas or with other outside activities. So indicators are very important in this aspect because they can measure different type of opportunities for us to identify gaps or other related things. So if you see nowadays, we can understand that most of our political and economic decisions are giving priority only to a restrict set of indicators, most of them that are related with marketing and monetary results. So we are used to see that well-being are related with how much you earn, or about GDP per capita, or about your national GDP. And of course, we are not saying that material aspects are not important, but we are saying that perhaps this is not enough. So we can say that when you're talking about indicators, and as we put it in the main topic of our discussion, the socio-ecological justice, we can closely link indicators to perspectives about what are the ways that we recognize, we define, we measure, and we can incorporate other values into our decision-making and global environmental governance process. So if you go one slide more, please, Stefan. When we are talking about our relationships with nature, it's important to have all of these aspects in mind. Our relationship with nature is very diverse. And when we are talking about nature values or nature contributions to people's values, which means that on our day-to-day, nature are giving us different contributions, are giving us different gifts that can make our life better, as we have air quality, as we have clean water, as we have food, or as we have spaces for fun and for being outside and relaxing. This is important to contextualize. So let's take an example for food. Basically, all different nations and different people have food for eating. But also, if you go for a more specific context, we can see food as not only for selling, eating, but also from different perspectives about how we relate with nature, about traditional knowledge, and about good well-being, living in harmony with nature. So these are opportunities that us using indicators have to set the road, to set the trail for whatever we want to measure, and then understanding specifically what are the point of view that we want to bring with us inside of this discussion. So one more, please, Stefan. So we bring these two perspectives, that is, we are already using indicators in our day-to-day, and second, that indicators can be used in different to approach for different aspects. So why indicators are important when we think about the relationship between biodiversity and youth? And let's say that we also have two good opportunities to think about this. And we are already in the process related with ecosystems and biodiversity issues. And at the same time, we hold the different values perspectives that go beyond market and monetary approaches. So that's something that's very important for us to understanding how deep and how far away are we going on these two dimensions. Can you go one more, please, Stefan? So we all know that we are in a deep socio-ecological crisis. We are on a biodiversity loss crisis. We are on a climate change crisis. All of these crises are related with the way that our economic and business as usual systems are going. And I step further is that we need to recognize that both or the crisis have negative impacts that are unequally distributed between different countries and different social groups. Once more, please, Sefa. And when we are talking about this inequality, we need to understand that youth are among the most vulnerable and excluded from decision-making process. And we can say this because, one, we are more susceptible to negative health effects of pollution, unclean water, deforestation, diseases. And at the same time, it's because of unequal intertemporal justice. So this means that decisions that are being taken today will reach directly our future. So if you're not taking decision making today, we are not talking about our own future. But at the same time, youth are in the front line when it comes to environmental issues and transformative change. Go one more, please, Sefa. So youth are excluded from decision-making process, which means that decision-making process are often unfriendly to youth and with lack of access to information. So most of times youth are put in a same bucket that define us as immature or not ready enough, or that this type of global to local discussions should not be lead or shared with us. We are often seen as beneficiaries and not leaders because of the same perspective. And we often do not have resources and support for our participation. If we go once more, please. At the same time, youth are drivers of transformative changes. So we are key implementants of biodiversity actions. We are often in the front line of environmental movements, and we can see, of course, strikes, but also different grassroots movements from youth in their own local communities, in their own territories, and different youth organizations and movements that are in the front line also of policy and advocacy agendas for environmental issues. And youth have a beautiful opportunity that goes allied with other major groups as indigenous peoples, local communities, girls and women, and others. You go once more, Sefa. So our rights here, we are talking that this must be respected, and our needs, perspectives, and priorities must be recognized and considered in decisions that affect us all. Once more, so regarding the things that we said, that's what we want to discuss here today. One, we are already in the front line. We are already doing different things. As you can see in this word map was from previous consultation from youth. We are going from a different perspectives, different agendas, working in different and broadly approaches related with biodiversity and ecosystems issues. And once more, Sefa, please. And at the same time, we need to consider that children and youth, we are diverse. So our issues, they are intersectional. So our issues are talking about children and youth, but at the same time are talking about other different aspects related with education, race, sexuality, indigenous peoples and local communities, culture. So what we are bringing are different values, approaches that goes for care, that goes for justice, that goes for stewardship. And this is things that we need to have in mind and question ourselves. Are these types of perspectives being measured? Are these types of things being considered in the indicators that we are using to think about our next steps related with our biodiversity agenda? So I thank you for your time. And for continuing the discussion, I will pass by to Mark.
Thank you, Hater, for that introduction to biodiversity and the youth. And it's actually a good question to start with the indicators on well-being. I would want to say I would see myself looking into my temperature as well as part of being good in terms of body temperature. So now we again move towards looking into your mentee. So may we invite everyone to go again to your mentee. We'll start the new discussions, but related to the previous one on indicators. So to go ahead, there's a lot of conversations talking about participation youth, engagement, biodiversity conservation. But today, we want to take the opportunity to ask everyone what is our definition of meaningful youth participation. So if you are able to go to the Menti again, thank you, Sefa, for posting that on the chat box. We want to get what your thoughts are in terms of answering this question. So what is meaningful youth participation for you? So it's kind of like a direct question for everyone. And we have been asking this a lot to people, and now we would want to ask everyone who are in this room as well. So just to read some of the answers. So their answers would be on representation. A wide variety of youths are included from all backgrounds. That's kind of like in a way inclusivity. Raising awareness of biodiversity conservation issues. We are looking into when your voice counts. That's actually a good way of meaningful youth participation definition. Where youth are fully involved in decision making for our land, being taken seriously, diversity, have the permission to make decision and act. So that's actually good as well. Involved Involving in policy making and policy research. It's good. Meaningful youth participation for me is when youth are very active in joining various programs, engage in various activities, and has initiative. Thank you for that. We also have answer on actually implementing the views and solutions put forward by the youth. It's really good. Project inclusion. There are also in French language on the answer. I hope our interpreters would be kind enough to interpret that on the chat so we could also learn what they have to say. Some more answers. It's being concerned and taking steps, being invited to meetings, having a seat on the table where we are asked what we want and how we can contribute towards something. These are really good answers on our definition of meaningful youth participation. Oh, workaholic. That's kind of like a new definition for meaningful youth participation. So how to look into that better, being workaholic as part of a meaningful youth participation. Meaningful engagement and participation where we have a respectful dialogue to forward our opinions and concerns. It's kind of like a good term as well, respectful dialogue. Meaningful youth participation is to offer one's skills and knowledge for the greater good of the community and to realize the intersectionality of today's world issues. So it's very profound. And as what Hater mentioned as well on the intersectionality, that's really good on looking into meaningful youth participation. So just keep your answers calm as we go through the Menti sessions for today. Just to also read some more, maybe three more, have the opportunity to make the change and to have an active voice. Later on, we'll be looking into that better. So those are kind of good definitions of meaning youth participation. So from these answers, does anyone like disagree on the definition of meaningful youth participation? Or is there something that kind of like tags as a red flag for you if that's not, or if it's a meaningful definition for youth participation for you? Or does everyone agree that this is at least um the definition for everyone on meaningful youth participation? Or is anything striking for you on what is on the screen right now on answers? So everyone's kind of like okay with this? Okay, now we move to the next question. So it's something similar, but we want to focus on not meaningful. So the first question is talking about what meaningful youth participation is for you. On this question, what is not meaningful youth participation is for you. Okay, discrimination, isolation. Yes, tokenistic engagement, tokenism. I hope everyone is able to understand what tokenism is. So, but later I'll explain this a bit, I guess. So tokenism again, taking them for granted, youth washing, okay, only providing suggestions and talking, no food provided. Oh, yeah, that's kind of like very good indicator, I guess. Okay, non-inclusion to decision-making process. All talk, no action. That's kind of like good to explore of not meaningful youth participation is. Okay, not be able to do anything, make decisions for us. Okay, being ignored, having neutral stances in today's world issues and having narrow viewpoints. Okay, being used for photos and PR activities. So this is a very good example of tokenism. So you're just there for posing and for photo ops. Okay. Being invited to places with a script given in hand. Okay. That's a good example of not meaningful youth participation as well. Providing views and being told we are incorrect. Oh, okay. That's very harsh, but yeah, it happens, no? For our experiences of being not having a meaningful youth participation. Oh, this one's good. Not enough funding to reach the pace of discussion. Okay, so someone actually mentioned financial resources support to youth engagement. It's actually good. No institutional or government support to implement youth projects. So good. Being dismissed for being youth, yes. So that's kind of like very harsh, but also very true and very realistic. I guess few more. Does anyone still answers the question? And we would want to ask the people who just joined in to mute themselves. Okay. Do we have more answers, Sepa, below the slides? Okay, there's a lot more. Okay, so no inclusivity, being given an opportunity and expecting us to work full time for $0 per hour. Okay, that's kind of like true and not really looking into the contributions in hours of the youth and not being compensated for the time that you're able to provide on that subject matter, for example. We have government youth representative, but no funding to collect youth voice. Okay. Not enough support to understand a meeting discussion, but invited for the sake of inviting someone. Yeah, right. It's very tokenistic. So these are our definitions of not meaningful youth participation. Does anyone have like a striking realization or does not agree to some of these definitions that is presented on the screen? Give me a heart react if you agree to all of this not meaningful youth participation. Okay. There's also on the chat on the lack of training and information. It's actually a good point. And we move to the last question for this mentee. Okay, for the last question, we would want you to describe in one word or a phrase what is meaningful youth participation for you. So it's kind of like a keyword that you are looking for this question. Impactful, yes. Safe space, that's actually good too. Matter, we matter, youth matter. Selfless, okay. Initiative, leadership, mutual respect, research, we are looking into, what's this? Okay, being understood. Okay, there's management on the chat as well. Leadership is kind of like big. Compromise. Well fed. Well, this is very constant with the not being provided by food. That's actually good point. Providing resources for youth in terms of attending meetings and conferences, for example. And this one can actually connect to the indicators of well-being, right? Being able to eat a good food. Okay, intellectually stimulated. So we have that as well. Capacity building is also a good word. We are looking to mutual agreement as well. Oh, there's this term recognizing youth as poor. Perhaps the one who answered this would want to explain more on the chat, or maybe you could quickly unmute yourself and maybe share what they mean by recognizing youth as poor as one of a meaningful youth participation word.
Yes, hello, it's Paul here.
Oh, Paul, that's
Basically,
you. Okay, thank you,
yeah,
Paul.
we don't own houses. Some of us might own a car. We have no savings and we have expenses. So we are basically poor compared to older generations.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And by meaningful youth in participation, people are recognizing and should recognize that there are contexts on that part to really consider kind of like supporting youth engagements on that matter. Am I correct? And am I able to understand that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. So yeah, so there's also word here, action, responsibility, being understood. Yes, transformative change we have here. But I guess the most common words are leadership, impactful, and action, if I'm not mistaken. So those words are kind of like big on the font. So it means that most of our answers are kind of like collapse on those words. Are there any other interesting words here? Transformative, sustainable, consideration we have here. I guess there are also French answers. Perhaps our interpreters could also translate that on the chat so we would understand that better. Funded is also a good word here for meaningful youth participation. Okay, and awareness as well. Power equalities. These are actually good words, and we haven't thought about these words really earlier when we are discussing this Menti session. Thank you everyone for answering. And Noor, you raised your hand. Are you sharing something? We can give you a bit of time to share if you raised your hand. Okay, okay. Thank you for that clarification. So these words we will be taking note, and we'll see and we'll be discussing, I guess, this and tomorrow some of these words that are actually kind of can be presented in a way that looks into indicators of determining meaningful youth participation for today and for tomorrow. And thank you for that. Just to supplement the discussion on meaningful youth participation, I would like to share the next screen. Okay, so there are words here on the screen that we always hear and we always read that in a way kind of like also in definition looks into participation. So we have collaboration, we have kind of like heard of these words already: collaboration, shared information, dialogue, empowerment, and consultation. So these are words that we use kind of like interchangeably when we talked about participation and engagement. But just to define a bit better, so collaboration encourages working together towards common goals and objectives, while shared information emphasizes the transparent exchange of relevant and accurate information and access to the same data, fostering informed decision making. And then dialogue would want to facilitate an open and constructive communication between stakeholders. So we always use dialogue. For example, we always use this on intergenerational dialogues, for example. And what it wants to do is to have an open communication between stakeholders to discuss subject matters. And then we also use empowerment. Empowerment wants to focus on ensuring that youth feel valued. So we talked about that. We feel valued and we feel that we are able to influence discussions. And empowerment also encourages the development of skills, knowledge, and confidence among the youth. So on the chat box, someone mentioned capacity building. Capacity building is part of empowerment for the youth. And consultations, which we have been doing a lot, looks into seeking inputs and feedbacks from the youth, for example, on a different subject matter. So these words are kind of like form the pillar of meaningful youth participation. And when we apply this all together cohesively, we are able to really build a strong collaborative relationship with the youth sector, with the youth network, ensuring that the decision-making process is inclusive. We have been using this word from the mentee as well, inclusive, informed, and responsive to the needs and perspective of the youth in biodiversity conservation. So basically, we wanted to collapse all these words all together to really look into have a meaningful youth engagement and participation to biodiversity conservation. And there are some models and approaches that we could also look and use to really see if we are being tokenized or if really there is kind of like activities that actually promotes meaningful youth engagement and participation of the youth. So for example, on the screen, there's a model from Roger Hart, which is the ladder of young people's participation. And you can see there are 8 steps here. So designated as rung 1 to rung 8. And on the bottom steps, it's rung 1, rung 2. These are kind of like the lowest level of participation on the ladder of the youth, which is actually forms the non-participation part of the youth. So for example, so we have good examples on the mentee earlier there when we say Sefa, can we go back to that slide? Okay. So just to continue on the ladder, so the lowest level of the ladder is non-participation. So a good example of that is that, for example, there is a development in your own community from a company or from the government, and you were not kind of like involved and engaged to that decision, which is basically you are being affected by that decision. So that's not non-participation. So that's the lower level of the ladder. Another example is that when there is a development on the area, but your culture and your historical significance was not involved or engaged or respected on that development, then definitely that's also part of the lower level of the ladder. So that's non-participation. At the middle level, that's tokenism. We mentioned this a lot on the mentee. So that's young people are assigned and informed, young people are being tokenized, and a good example of that is like on the mentee, right? So when you are called in for a photo ops, that's basically tokenism. So, and for example, you are being called to attend a meeting just for the purpose of having a youth attendance on that. So that's also a good example of tokenism. Another example is the symbolic gestures that they use. So they would call in community members or youth members to be part of the group, but they are not being involved and they are not being consulted, and their decisions are not being part of the decision of that group as well. So those are examples of tokenism. So the upper part of the ladder is on youth power or citizens power, and this is where what we wanted to really see meaningful youth engagement or meaningful youth participation on biodiversity conservation, where at the higher part of the ladder, our participation and the youth are able to negotiate and change the status quo of a system on different aspects of biodiversity conservation. And this is where our voices are heard and responded to. So on the first definition of meaningful youth participation, this is what we wanted to reach to be part of the higher rung of the ladder. So there is also another kind of like a model and approach that we also wanted to look into besides the ladder. So that can help you also identify of meaningful youth participation. So this is the three lens approach to youth participation. This is from the Youth Peace and Security Programming Handbook from UN. So you could look into that as well. But on this approach, there are three lenses. First is the target group youth as target group lens. So this one's looking into um, working for youth as beneficiaries. So youth are being looked into as only beneficiaries of the project. The second lens, which is kind of like goes into a deeper review of that, is on looking at youth as collaborators. So this one looks into engagement with the youth as partners. So it's kind of like a deeper level of looking into the lens. And the last lens would be as youth as initiators. So this lens looks into now looking into youth as being leaders and was are able to initiate youth-led activities and also create a space conducive for participation of youth in decision making and other conservation work. So basically what we want to focus on this lens is on the last part, at least on the second and last. So working with the youth and working with the youth towards an effective development. So we're looking towards supporting youth as leaders and initiators for youth-led activities and projects. So this is another approach that we can look into for reviewing meaningful youth participation on biodiversity conservation work. Right? So if you have questions, please feel free to put that in the chat box or raise your hand.
Si vous avez des
So,
questions, veuillez les mettre dans le chat.
okay,
Just a second while we fix the interpretation. I think Yusuf
thank
was
you.
put out. Okay. Are you
So-
there, Yusuf? Can you just confirm that you're in the interpretation room? Just a second.
Yes.
Okay, there. It should be fixed now. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. So just to continue our discussion with the meaningful youth participation, now we moved into the Menti. Let's go back to Menti and somehow go back to the first question of today. So looking now into the indicators. So we'll be flashing the question again. So for this part, this is a bit challenging now. So we look deeper and we're able to relate haters, discussion, and indicators. So the question would be on what can we measure to know whether youth participation is meaningful? So how can we now and what should we look into to really say that there is a meaningful youth participation on one event or one activity, for example? Okay, level of engagement, positive impact in society. So I guess our interpreters would help us interpret the French on the chat. So how many youth attends? Youth projects funded, range of sustainability, activities, the youth youth's voice is heard and considered by the policymakers. Okay,
If I may,
thank you.
Mark, if you can try to push yourselves a bit more to think,
Yeah.
how do we actually measure these things? Like, what do we measure so that we know if we are being heard by policymakers? Ideas like that would be really helpful. Back to you, Mark. Sorry.
Thank you, Sepa. So just to supplement Sepa's comment, if you would want to add more, like for example, on the question on well-being, your indicator is temperature, for example. So something you can also measure, or is a quality that you can look into to say that there is a meaningful youth participation on that. So thank you. Level of impact. We are looking into youth initiatives included and funded. So measure the resonance of youth voices, depth of engagement, tangible impact on decisions, and the transformative influence on policies for meaningful youth participation. Those are kind of like good words for what can we measure, but perhaps like really looking into more details of it. So maybe looking into resonance of youth. What does we mean by resonance? Is there a way to measure resonance? And if so, what should we measure? For example, how many youth participants were involved in consultations? Youth capacity building supported, reaching their goals, level of impact in the community. So if you have other insights, just feel free to put them in. Reaching goals, number of youth funded and of capacity building, number of comments and contributions from young people on documents submitted by government authorities like the NBSAPs. So those are kind of like good measures, I guess. Percent of funding dedicated to youth-led. It's also a good way to measure. There is follow-ups, relationships, continuous and long-term. Okay, so relationships, are we also looking into network formed? How many networks are formed by the youth, for example? If we look into relationships, youth knowledge on important topics. Okay, so how do we measure youth knowledge, for example? Does anyone have an idea on that? Maybe you could also share that here or on the chat. Number of youth engaged in decision-making process. It's actually good. Presence and level of capacity support for youth and attend related with discussions and jargons of the government. Okay. Are we still having answers? Positive change in the community is actually good, but how do we know, how do we measure positive change? Perhaps you could also put that here. Percentage of funding allocated to ensure youth participation is high. Level of interest, how much opportunities were shared, networking, how involved youth are with stakeholders. So we have someone raised his hand. Vilele, do you want to share something? We can give you a bit of time. Vilele. Percent of biodiversity, can we move down several? Okay, percent of biodiversity measurement data that are generated by youth is also good to look into. Okay, now we are being more measurable, I guess, on the later part. Surveying large group of youth for knowledge and interest in making change. So this is more of a how, I guess, but it's also good to look into youth knowledge and understanding of the project they're participating in. So they're confident to speak and navigate the field they're in. It's good. So there's kind of like another on the confidence to engage with decision makers. So I guess looking into that measure, how do you we measure confidence, I guess? on those parts, but that's kind of like a good thought to consider how we feel empowered, so confident on this kind of matter. Parties with youth representatives, okay? So that's it. Thank you for those answers, and we will have time to digest all of this and somehow relate this for the session tomorrow. So we will give you the time to also kind of like reflect on these answers to really how we measure meaningful youth participation on different cycles of biodiversity conservation. But these are actually good start to really discuss indicators for measuring meaningful youth participation. And at the last part, I think there's kind of like someone mentioned social media interaction. So probably those are kind of like good indicators to look into when we look into social media as well and its impact to biodiversity and youth as well. So yeah. Sepa, do you have other thoughts to add to this before we move to the break? If not, then we'll yeah.
No, these are all
Okay.
really, really helpful. And if you want to
Yeah.
continue answering, we'll actually keep this Menti open for the break.
Yes.
But for now, group picture mark.
Yes. So these are actually good start for our next discussions of looking into indicators to measure meaningful youth participation. So we'll close this screen, but the Menti is still open. If there are still thoughts you would want to consider, please feel free to add more. But before we let you go on a 5-minute break, may we ask everyone to open their camera for a group photo. You would want to see your beautiful faces for a camera. There we go. Thank you, everyone. So we have 5 pages. Wow. So I asked for your patience, for your smile. So keep it like a minute or two because we have 5 pages to capture for this group photo. So let me just take that photo, keep smiling, everyone. I would say stop if I took all of the 5 pages because I don't know where you are on these pages. So so bear with me with the photo ops. Okay. Smile, everyone.
How's it going, Mark? Which page?
Okay,
Okay.
last page. Bear with me. One last page for the group photo. Okay. Thank you for that. And thank you for opening your camera and sharing your beautiful smile to everyone. We will let you get a bit of a stretch for 5 minutes and we hope to see you again because the later part we will now talk about more of the indicators by SEPA. So we'll see you in 5 minutes. Please go back.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. That's really helpful. We always forget. Thank you so much. So and now the second dimension that many of you mentioned was in terms of resources. Oops, let me just okay. So with resources, some of you mentioned funding for projects, things that young people want to do. And then there should also be funding and resources for actually participating in some decision-making processes. So that's both of those are also really important. Many of you focused on decision-making. on this decision-making aspect. Some ideas thrown out were, for example, how many young people are actually in these processes? How confident are they to participate? How many contributions by young people are actually reflected in the policies and in the documents? How many young people are involved in providing technical advice? How many minds were changed from youth input? So that's also interesting. How can we measure that, I wonder? And some, like, what are there positions that are being held by young people? So it's another aspect. Another in terms of
والله ما
implementation.
أعرفهم كلهم، مين ما بيعرف هالقصص؟
Okay, thank you. Are there roles that young people are playing in implementation? Is there long-term collaboration? I'm sure there are other aspects that we'll capture after this webinar. And then in terms of information and support and other enabling conditions, is there support for capacity building? Are there networks being formed? Others that you mentioned earlier was information, training, and having the knowledge and the skills, right? And then youth monitoring. There were two interesting aspects that came out that I was able to take note of. First is their data actually being generated by young people. So this is a very interesting concept because community-based monitoring is actually an important thing that communities use, so that the data that they are gathering is helpful for them, not just for policymakers and decision makers, but it actually is important for themselves. And that's the driving factor behind what information they gather. And then there's also this aspect of having disaggregated data. So do we know the ages of the people participating? Do we know their gender? Those kinds of things. It's really important so that we can respond to different impacts for different groups. And then there was also this aspect of opportunities, which I think is also worth exploring, because like, how do we measure opportunities that are out there? So I hope this is helpful to try to put into some categories some of your answers earlier. But again, we will work on this more after the webinar. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any reactions, please put them in the chat. Yeah, Busi?
Hi, Safa, and greetings to everyone. Thank you for such a wonderful opportunity and platform. When I was listening to the results, I just felt like there was maybe an area that's missing. Maybe that is something that could be done even tomorrow before we start, which talks about or looks into how many of the young people that are in here or in this space are doing this on their free time and employed elsewhere, or are employed to do this on a full time, or are volunteering. Because it also comes back to the point that Paul made earlier on, that we do not have resources and all these other things. But at the same time, if you attend all these conventions and you come back and you're not coming back to an institution, an organization that will compensate for your time, then yeah, also the time that you've taken away to go to conventions, if you're working for someone, that particular organization might not be quite comfortable with you doing that on a regular basis, being away from other work that you paid for. So maybe to get that indication as well will actually help. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that. That was, yeah, that's really important. And I'm sure many of us also find that really relatable and pertinent to our own lives. I think I made some note of it here. Let me just see. But I've noted it there. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, absolutely. And that's really important. And it's also something that can be measured, right? How many people, maybe it's also related to opportunities, actually. Are there opportunities for young people to be funded or to have to make a career, for example, out of conservation and biodiversity and things like that? Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who would like to mention some dimensions that are really important that maybe is missing here? Some big gaps? So for now, thank you so much again for your very, very rich contributions. This is already really helpful, and I'm also going to share this with our speakers tomorrow, who were interested actually in the outcomes of the first day of our discussion. So we'll go now to a bit of a discussion on where actually the outcomes from this process will go. First of all, I wanted to say that this is actually pretty much a first step in a much longer conversation. We expect it to be a longer conversation so that we can try to deepen some of the aspects that came out from today. And in particular, as the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, we also wanted to share with you where these outputs will go, what will we do with them, where could they fit in, right? And I'll go through 3 different things today. Just so first is these outcomes will actually be really helpful in filling the gaps in youth-related indicators in relation to biodiversity. And I'll speak more about this right after. The second is the monitoring framework of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is currently being negotiated. And then also in the updating of national biodiversity strategies and action plans, which are ongoing in almost every country. Okay, so first of all, the first one is filling gaps in youth-related indicators for biodiversity. So I just want to emphasize some points. So first of all, indicators are really the, okay, thank you. First, we know, I just want to remind everyone that indicators are actually what governments, other institutions, and actually youth themselves. Indicators are the way that we understand progress on issues that we think are important. And that is inclusive of society and also how we monitor the environment, the state of the environment, right? However, we also know that currently there are important gaps when it comes to youth-related indicators for biodiversity, right? There are not many institutions that gather this kind of data. We have a few at the global level. Not many of them focus in particular on the environment, for example. And then at the national level, we also know that in many countries, many of our countries, this kind of data is not being measured. Or if it is being measured, it might not be the data that is meaningful for us, right? So because of these gaps, many important issues for young people are invisible in statistics, in global statistics, in national statistics, and even local statistics, right? And we should be concerned about that. Why? So this information and this data is being used to inform policies and programs that are being developed. And these policies and programs impact young people. Many of them are directly impacting us, and they're going to impact our future, right? So, and again, the data that is existing have many gaps on youth and even bigger gaps on these aspects that are meaningful for young people and are helpful for young people, okay? And moreover, many of the indicators that are currently being used were not developed with the participation of young people, okay? So we need to do our part also in addressing these gaps so that data can be collected that measures our contributions to biodiversity, for instance, that measures our how our perspectives are being taken into account, and also measure the impacts on young people of all of these things, right? because if this data is not being gathered, it is invisible. And what we are trying to do is to make the invisible visible through indicators. Okay. There are many different approaches where we could that we could take to fill these gaps. First is the creation of new indicators where they don't exist yet. The second one is by requiring new forms of data collection for existing indicators. For example, maybe the way that they gather information, or the way that, for example, the way that they gather information, like a focus group discussion, doesn't actually involve young people as the participants, and then you require it, change the requirements such that it requires some young people to attend those. That's one way, for example. The third way is by advancing the use of existing indicators that we think are good. So there are many indicators out there. Some of them are limited to very local contexts, which is sometimes the most helpful. But there are situations where those indicators, which are only being used in a small area, are actually relevant to be used in other places, as long as you adapt it to that context. But because they're good and they're meaningful, we can promote their wider use. Yeah. And then the fourth is by ensuring that we have disaggregated data. So this means that you're not lumping all of the people together. You're instead collecting data so that you know which data refers to young people, for example, which data refers to women, which data refers to indigenous peoples. And in that way, the data that you are already gathering can be differentiated as to, it can be used to assess differential impacts and differential contributions, for example. So those are just some ways that we can address these gaps. Okay, so hopefully I'm not speaking too fast. So, and as a final point for this section, whichever approach is taken, when it comes to indicators for youth, young people have to be part of that process to develop those indicators. And it's important also that these indicators take into account things that we just discussed, young people's own concepts of well-being, and also young people's concepts of meaningful participation, right? Okay, so that's one. Go to the next. One of the more short-term places where we can use some of these outcomes is in the ways that we measure our progress towards reaching global targets for biodiversity, right? So we know that in December of 2022, countries and governments of countries all over the world adopted what we call the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, right? What it is a biodiversity plan for life on Earth. It has 4 goals for 2050 and 23 global targets for 2030. And these goals and targets are going to guide the whole of society, governments, but also civil society, indigenous peoples, businesses, for example, towards halting and reversing biodiversity loss, right? And also to reach our long-term vision of living in harmony with nature. So since this was adopted in 2022, currently the Convention on Biological Diversity is in this process to finalize, negotiate the indicators that will actually tell us whether we're making progress towards these goals and targets. Okay. And the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, as the youth constituency to the CBD, is taking part in this process. And so your voices are very, very valuable to us, so that we can bring these perspectives as we participate in the Convention on Biological Diversity. And many of you are also involved in these processes. Okay. And then finally, at least the third way that we're going to use these outcomes is in the updating of national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So countries are currently in the process of updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or NBSAPs, to align with the recently adopted Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. What this means is that they are making national targets and national indicators for their roadmap to address biodiversity loss, right? NBSAPs are actually the main way that countries implement their obligations on biodiversity that they agreed on, for example, with the Global Biodiversity Framework, and also other decisions that are made under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Okay, so this is a process that is currently ongoing until the next conference of the parties of the CBD in October. Hopefully that's clear. Let me know if you have any questions. So I'll go to a related issue. So the Global Youth Biodiversity Network in 2022 actually did a review of previous NBSAPs, so that we could actually understand how much they reflect young people's issues and youth participation, and how many of them reflect indicators that are relevant for youth. So let's see. So it's not showing, just a second. Okay, never mind, I can't fix that. Out of the results, we actually found that very few of them, well, around 57% of them mentioned youth, but 44% and 44% mentioned youth-targeted initiatives, but very few, so only 8 out of the 73 that we reviewed, or 11% mentioned youth-led initiatives. And then, how were youth reflected, right? In what capacity were youth reflected? 43% of them reflected youth as stakeholders and beneficiaries. So that's also important, right? But going further, very few of them mention young people as contributors to implementation or as participants in decision making. So that's very telling of how governments perceive young people and young people's contribution. And then, sorry, the slide is not showing up correctly, but in any case, with regards to the context in which youth were reflected, most of them reflected us in terms of education, awareness, and capacity building. Most often, it was youth as in need of capacity building, right? And you can see very few reflect young people as part of decision making, or as natural resource managers, or in terms of resources, for example. So for indicators, we also asked young people to assess their NBSAPs to see how many of them reflect youth-related indicators, and just very few. So 14% reflected youth-related indicators, and just 3% actually reflected age disaggregated indicators. So that's really disappointing, right? And again, this was a youth-led review, so young people reading their NBSAPs and seeing how youth were reflected. So we were also curious, how satisfied were they with what they read? And many of them were not satisfied, right? And in particular, for example, this is what the young people who reviewed these reports said. They said, I'm disappointed to see that youth has been mentioned nowhere in the report. Or they said, no, it feels superficial youth is not seen as a serious stakeholder and there is no mention of youth being part of the decision making. No, because youth were only mentioned as a group in need of education and not as a group that is capable of meaningful interaction with policy. They said they were not satisfied because youth can be highlighted better as stakeholders in decision making. Another noted that from what they read, there was in their countries and VSAP, there was no indicator on youth at all. Youth are never mentioned as an actor themselves. There are no targets to include them. And the capacity to contribute is not mentioned also, right? And then someone said, with no youth indicators in place, the efficiency of youth contributing to the work will not be measured and strengthened properly in action. So this is very enlightening. For us, it was really helpful for us as we tried to advocate for young people's views in the Global Biodiversity Framework. And it's still very relevant now in the current discussion that we are having on youth indicators. So yeah, that is to say that young people all over the world, many of them through our GYBN chapters, are actually actively involved in the updating process of national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And hopefully, with this continuing, we will be able to improve those numbers in the next generation of national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or NBSAPs. Okay, so if you're interested, do get in touch with GYBN or the chapter in your country if you're not in touch yet. And so, yeah, so again, these are the different processes where this information will go. And I'm happy to answer any questions for a few minutes before we start to close. Yes, Abdulhamid from GYBN Kenya. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sefa, for your presentation. I think I'm audible. Just nod for me to confirm. Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to appreciate the work that GYBN policy team has done regarding the process that we are into as countries. I've followed up so closely the survey or the analysis that GYBN team did with around 70, you said 78 or 73 thereabout NBSAPs, and and you noted some gaps. My interest was maybe you did it, but you haven't showed it. In terms of the regions, how did they play out? Like when others were seeing youth as partners or beneficiaries, which regions really came out clearly to identify youth as stakeholders, key stakeholders, and which one did not really do that, so that then it informs our next engagement as we end the process. I think that one will be very important to understand. And another point that I wanted to raise or to ask, okay, it has just left my mind, but when I remember it, I'll ask. Thank you.
Sure, let me answer that for now. So I'm not sure that we did that in the analysis, but the data is there to make that analysis. So to disaggregate that data by region will be possible. And if you're interested in knowing that, or even seeing if anyone was able to do the analysis for your country, we can share that with you. Or we encourage you to also do a similar analysis of your own NBSAPs, because that will help you also in your national advocacy. So get in touch with me and I can share with you if we will be able to share with you that data. Aside from that, yes, sorry, I'll just continue my previous point, which is that can actually be a guide for everyone to look at their country's policies and assess how much of it actually responds to young people's needs. NBSAPs are available publicly. You can download them on the CBD website, or you can just Google it. And I encourage actually everyone to take a look so that you know what is in your NBSAP, first of all, and also if it's responding to young people. Jack, go ahead. We remembered your second question.
Yes, thank you. I've just remembered my second question. And maybe it's just to implore us, the young people, because I'm trying to look at, I've participated in the Menti, and I've seen how young people are dissatisfied with how they are being engaged through this process. And one key thing that I'm trying to ask myself is, we have young people who are already working with the government, and most of the time when we go for this meeting, they see themselves as not part of the youth bracket. So they are on their own, and we as the youth within some level of networks or coalitions, we are left on the other side. So it's like we have youth in the coalitions and we have youth in the government. And so the youth in the government try to play out that they are not part of the problems the youth in coalitions are facing. And so is it time for us to reach out to some of the youth who are in the government? Because I believe in the government, they play a key role, even when coming up with the tools to use for monitoring. Is some of these young people do the much of the work in the ministries or in the government that they serve. Do they really, okay, we want to understand how best do they, are they engaged in the process that we from this side see it as not meaningful or participatory in a way? Which mindset do they go with when trying to come up with how to collect data? Because people can share experience with us to understand, are they, or are their views also not taken into consideration, or what always happens with them because they see themselves as not in the process, or not the youth as we know the youth brackets. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jack. I think that's something for all of us to reflect on. And if I might just briefly comment, I think it's also worth looking into sensitizing people in the government about young people's issues. Many of them, it's not that they have bad intentions, it's just that they don't understand. And maybe the young people in the government are some of the people who we can see as potential allies and pushing for our issues. We have time for one more question. I'll call Nicolas from Chile. So the Spanish interpreter, if you can switch to
Yes.
the channel. Thank you.
Sefa,
Go ahead.
gracias, Sefa. I can speak in English. Thank you for the insightful presentation. And in relation with this updating of National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plan and NBSAPs, but also considering this previous result that you just show us in terms of the indicators, and also for the audience, including me, that are kind of new within the GYBN community. Do you have name of a group of countries that is actually championing the youth inclusion within this specific process of the UN CBD? Thank you.
We have some countries that we have been supporting us for a while. And we also know that they include young people in their own processes with regards to the CBD. I can share you some of them, but it's not an exhaustive list at all. Just from the top of my head, for example, we have an expert from the government of Mexico who's joining us tomorrow to share her perspectives on this whole issue of youth indicators. So we can look forward to that. And we also know that Mexico has been one of the countries that have been supporting young people to participate in decision-making processes, and are willing to engage with our Mexican chapter, for example. We also have countries that have been supporting Gibbon's positions when we participate in the CBD. So there are a lot of them. I won't be able to name them. And then we have countries, for example, in my region, in the ASEAN, or maybe Mark, you want to respond to this? I don't know if you're raising your hand to respond in particular to this. If it's so,
Yes, Zefa, I guess to also help Nikolai from the question on looking into youth contributions for the NBSAP updating, there was a live session conducted last November, which is available at YouTube now. You can look into that, where we kind of had sharings of experiences and learnings of the process of the youth engagement on their own NBSAP. We have someone from the Philippines and someone from Mexico who shared their kind of like process and learnings and recommendations on how youth can engage on NBSAP updating. So I guess perhaps that can be helpful for you if you wanted to learn more on some experiences of the other chapters for youth engagement. So I can send the link at the chat box for that specific session if you are interested as well. Thank you, Sepa.
yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Mark. And maybe just to finish my answer, I think many different countries are in different stages of learning how to enable meaningful youth participation in their countries. I think the best source of that information might be other young people in your country, or your chapters who have been engaging longer in the process can tell you a bit more about the progress that they've made in terms of that. Because I know that some countries started out not so good, but now they're improving and things like that. So yeah, we can connect you to members who can share with you about that, or do go to the webinar that Mark linked in the chat. There are also other sessions there that are really relevant, like how to do stakeholder engagement. There are also some sessions on biodiversity in general, and sessions on the Global Biodiversity Framework. So we highly recommend that. That's also done in collaboration with UNESCO. Okay, so I'm gonna start to close. We'll give you an overview of tomorrow's session, and then we ask you to please stay for just a short feedback session on today's session. Okay, so day 2, tomorrow, we hope you can join us. We really look forward to being able to discuss with an intergenerational panel of experts from a number of different institutions. So we have someone coming from Youth 2030 Secretariat, which is the UN's youth strategy, who will talk a bit about their experience with developing youth indicators, global youth indicators. We have someone who will be coming from UNESCO, in particular the education sector, who will talk about existing indicators for education that might be helpful for us as we explore the role of education in addressing biodiversity loss. We have someone, like I said, from the government of Mexico, from GYBN Kenya, from the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, and also the CBD Women Caucus. All of their insights will definitely be really interesting for us. And as I mentioned earlier, day 2 will start to go towards issues that young people have identified as important to them. Beyond youth participation, we also, for example, value intergenerational equity, human rights-based approaches, and things like that. So we're going to see what is currently out there in terms of indicators for those kinds of things. So finally, we ask you to please go back to Menti, and I'll pass to Shruti to facilitate our feedback session. Thank you, Shruti. And thanks for staying.
Thank you, Sefa. Yeah, thank you all for staying. So this is the final part of the workshop today, and I'll present my screen. Hopefully you're able to see it. So yeah,
it's not yet full.
It's not yet? Okay.
It's good.
Okay. It's good? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is a couple of more questions to understand and to get a feedback on how you felt about the session. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So first question is, how are you feeling after the session? I know it's been a informative session. We had a lot of speakers talk to you about various aspects of youth engagement and indicators. So we would like to know what you're feeling. So enlightened, informed, inspired, that's great. Sorry again to the interpreters if they can tell me what the Spanish and the French words mean in chat. That will be helpful. More knowledgeable, excited, grounded. Okay, I think that's a new response that we've not got before. Saying grounded, sleepy. Okay, I can understand it's quite late in several countries. Motivated. So the interesting thing is the bigger the word, the more the number of people who answered that. So it kind of gives us an understanding of what majority of you also feel. So I see motivated, informed, and enlightened as the three bigger results. Learn new perspectives. Neck hurt. Okay. That's interesting. Why would you? I think maybe your position, time to change your position and stretch a bit. Outstanding. That's great. Fortunate. Nothing new. Okay. Maybe tomorrow might be a bit more enlightening. This was to kind of cover all our bases and get you all on the same level so that all of you understand as we go into more deeper discussion. So tomorrow, listening to the experts will give you a better, hopefully new insights. Spanish, okay. Anxious, I'm looking at the chat and it says anxious, overwhelmed, okay. Awarded, okay. Very happy, enthusiastic about the future. Okay, the three ones are still motivated, enlightened, and informed. Keep those coming. And since we're running a little bit over time, I'll move on to the next one. The next one is, what is your key takeaway from today? So what is it, something you learned or something new you learned or something that kind of stuck out to you that is different? Something that as something that you take away with you as a thought to think about and think about a bit more and to kind of formulate your own opinion or ideas around that. Nothing. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Maybe tomorrow's the day for you then. Yeah. Youth participation and inclusion is still lacking and it must improve, right? Yeah, I think that's what we are all working towards. So hopefully we continue the journey. Youth engagement and participation. Okay, youth participation. So majority have said that you've learned a bit more about youth participation and how to improve that and have a more meaningful or effective inclusion of youth. More worded reasons why youth is put. Okay, revisit our NBSAPs. That's great. Leading role of Mexico. Okay, tomorrow you'll hear from the representative. So yeah, definitely Mexico is leading. Want to reach out to my peers and see if we can implement any of the things we thought of today. That's great. That's motivation. Robert Hart ladder of youth participation. Yeah, I think that's also something that kind of stood out to me as well, that you can actually measure the level of youth participation. Motivation, great insights, making decision and well-being. Okay. I learned about Gibbon CBD NBSAPs indicators in the context sharing session. So I think our team have done a good job of covering all the bases today. Good. What is data segregation? Okay. Maybe someone, speakers can maybe clarify that in the chat. I learned how words are very important in changing lives. How you guys explain the impact of indicators. That's true. I think all of these negotiation spaces are more of word plays more than anything else. And it's important for us to understand those nuances in order to be involved in them. So I think that's a very good takeaway for us as well. Inspired to do something using my knowledge and platform. Okay, indicators are not easy to define. True. True. I think you hit the nail on the head. True. Okay, then I'll move on to keep those answers coming. So the Menti is still open. You can still do that. I'm just going to the next one because of the lack of time. Yeah, so the last one, comments and suggestions for the team. So if there is anything that you'd like to tell us as ways to improve, maybe, or something that you liked, so it can be anything. And we'll keep this in mind going forward tomorrow for the next session, and we'll try to improve our sessions. And maybe if there's anything specific you would like, this, because you already know the speakers coming in tomorrow, if there's anything specific that you would like, maybe that is something that we can probably pass on to the speakers as well for them to come prepared. Okay, great learning session. Songs should be in English. Okay. We were trying for being more inclusive. Yeah, maybe we'll put more English. It was perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, that's great. I think the session was wonderfully explained and shared. Love the use of Menti. Really enjoyed seeing what other opinions were. That's great. Yeah, I again request our interpreters to kindly help me with that. Really like the songs. That's great. Please share the presentations and contacts with presenters for follow-ups. Okay. So maybe Sefa, Mark, or Haita, if you can put your contact details, maybe they can contact you. We need a motivation activity. Okay. Okay, maybe we'll plan a few stretching or icebreakers, but more different icebreaker questions for tomorrow. Cover areas, example, how to initiate a project, seek funds, create impact, and ensure sustainability of a project. Okay. More specific insights coming. It was a better presentation technique, else it was awesome. Okay. Is there more text? Is there something specific you would like us to improve on that? Also, can we have this earlier a bit late first? Yes, yeah, I understand. But the problem is for Latin America, it's early. So we had to find a balance between one end of the world and the other. So this kind of works for majority of the community. So we had to stick with this. Yeah, but it's unfortunate that we had to do this. And engaging, insightful, and thought-provoking, this online workshop offered a valuable platform for learning and collaboration. Okay, that's great. I'm experiencing for the first time learning like a game. That's good. That's great. Okay, and let the sessions be more interactive because I got bored. Okay, we'll do it. Yes. Want to see more? Okay. Want to see more technical information? Yes. So tomorrow is the day. We'll hopefully get you all tomorrow. So maybe I think I can close the session and handing it over
Okay.
back to Sefa. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's not much else to say except thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Thank you to our interpreters for doing the very difficult job today of letting everyone enabling everyone to understand what we are discussing. And thank you to yeah, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our session. See you all tomorrow and take care.